This is one of those days that you guys usually like because there's not much notes. We're just going to work a few together off of this worksheet. So we'll take a few notes at the top, and then you need a calculator. And you guys at home, find something online that can do what we're going to do. Or if you have a calculator, that would be even better. But let's take a few notes, and then we'll do some of these together. So it says state the period for each, then find all the solutions between 0 and 2 pi, round to 3 decimals. So there's two parts of this. There's the find the period part and then find the solution part. So you know the period already, or how to find that, but let's do that for number 2. Because what's the period for sine of 2x? We don't have to worry about the cube part, but what's the period for sine of 2x? Uh-oh, do you remember what the period is, generally speaking? Sine and cosine is 2 pi over b. Tangent is pi over b for period. So just looking at sine of 2x, not the cubed part, because that doesn't really affect the period. What's the period for sine of 2x? Oh, it's been too long. Pi, right? Because the normal period's 2 pi. We divide by 2, so that period is pi. How about the period for cosine of x? 2 pi. So this is kind of a weird one. These are different periods for different pieces of the function. Well, the overall period is the least common multiple of whatever period you've already got. So what's the least common multiple of pi and 2 pi? Not the greatest common factor. So it's not pi, it's 2 pi. It's the bigger one. Should have done warm-ups on least common multiple. All right, most of them have the same period if there's more than one. Not all of them, but most of them have the same period if there's more than one trig function in there. So if they have the same one, it's no big deal. It's just whatever it is. But if they're different, then you got to use the least common multiple to find the period. All right, let's talk about using the calculator to solve. This is super important, a very important skill in calculus, using a calculator to solve an equation. Let's first say our calculator has to be in radians. You can see it. So grab your calculator. Press the mode button. Mode. And the default mode is radians, so it's probably in radians. Most of the time in here we're using radians, so if you grab one of my calculators, you're probably going to be in radians. Physics usually uses degrees, so if you're going back and forth between math and physics, then you better be careful. But we need to be in radians. In a minute, I'll show you what happens when you're in degrees. You'll probably catch the mistake. But make sure you're in radians. That's step number 1. Step number 2, set your equation equal to 0. Because it's a whole lot easier for your calculator and for you to find answers if it's equal to 0. So let's move everybody to one side. Doesn't matter which side, but let's move everybody to one side. So 3 sine cubed 2x minus 2 cosine x equals 0. right, our next step will be to graph that between 0 and 2 pi, because it wants answers between 0 and 2 pi. Like it told us, find all the solutions between 0 and 2 pi. So that means we want to look between 0 and 2 pi. So you got to read the directions. If this said 0 to 4 pi, well, then we'd want to look from 0 to 4 pi. If it said 0 to pi, then we'd only want to look 0 to pi. So the directions will tell you like how wide to make your window so you know where to look. All right, so go to y equals. Clear out anything that's already in there. And then right here is about the only place people make a mistake in this section, because the calculator does all the work. You just got to put the equation in correctly. So 3. Now I'm going to need to cube the sign, so I'm going to put it in the calculator like this. 3 sine of 2x. You've got to have parentheses around the argument. That happens automatically. And then close them on the sign and then cube it. Now, I don't expect you to write it out calculator style every time, or really any time, but I'm just trying to show you what it will look like in the calculator. So 3, open parentheses, because I know I'm going to have to cube that sign. Sine of 2x. Close the parentheses on the 2x, close it on the sign, and then cube it. And minus 2 cosine. You've seen this already, but when you hit sine or cosine or tangent, it automatically opens the parentheses. So you got to make sure you close it on the other end. 2 cosine of x, close parentheses. And I can graph that. I'm on a weird scale right here, because definitely a weird scale. So I'm going to go to window. Oh, that's why it looks weird. I'm going to go from 0 to 2 pi, because that's all I care about for my x's. So 0 to 2 pi for my x window. For my y window, I definitely don't need to go to 150, so I don't know what I was doing on this one. As long as you can see 0, you'll be good enough. So I'm just going to go negative 5 to 5. To make sure I see 0 in there. If the graph goes off the top or off the bottom, I don't really care, because I'm only concerned with where this thing is 0. Okay, yours should look like mine if you're in radians and if we have the same window. So 0 to 2 pi and negative 5 to 5 for x window and y window. So check that if yours doesn't look like mine does. Oh, yeah, if you want to see what happens when you're in degrees, here's what happens. Basically, not much is usually the answer. So if you get a graph that looks like a straight line somewhere, and if you think about it, the reason is 0 to 2 pi is all the way around, right? That's a full revolution on the unit circle. This is 0 to 6, but 0 to 6 degrees. Well, 6 degrees is, just a super small opening. So we're not seeing much of the graph if we look from 0 to 6 degrees. So let's go back to radians. But that shows you what happens. Usually, what happens when you're in degrees. It looks like a flat line. So if that happens to you, then let that trigger your brain of, wait a minute, I better go make sure I'm in radians so I get a heartbeat looking thing. All right, I'm a little bit worried about what's going on in here. So I think I'm going to change my window to be negative 3 to 3. That'll kind of zoom in a little bit. Oh, that's much better. Now I can see where the zeros are. And yes, it goes off the screen, the top and the bottom, but we don't care about that. What we're looking for is where these zeros are. So as long as you can see where the zeros are, you're fine. What it does up there and down there, it doesn't really matter to us. All right, here's the magic of the calculator. Calc 0. The calculator can find where the zeros are. So calc is above the trace button, so second calc. And then the second option is 0. If you remember that far, the calculator will walk you through how to do the rest. Because it says left bound question mark. So you move your cursor, I'm going to go in order here. You move your cursor left of the 0 that you're trying to find. So I'm going to go in order. If I want to find that first 0, I need to get a little bit to the left of the 0. Press enter, and then it says right bound. You're like, okay, so I guess I need to get to the right of that 0. So make sure you're to the right of the 0. Press enter again, and then it says guess. You can just hit enter again. If you want to like try to go get closer, that's fine, but you can just hit enter again. And then the calculator does a little bit of thinking and figures out where that 0 is. So there's our first answer. And it says 3 decimal places, so 0.496. Right, this one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 answers. That's the most of any of the ones on the page, so it's kind of annoying, but at least it's the worst one. So let's do the same thing again for the next 0. Second calc, 0, left bound. So get to the left of the 0 that you're concerned about. Press enter. Get to the right of the 0 you're concerned about. Enter. Guess, you can just press enter again. So my next one is 1.254. Second calc 0. Do the next one. .571. I think that's pi over 2, but it doesn't matter. We just want the decimal. Again, this is the worst one in terms of how many there are. Okay, on the fourth one, this is what I wanted to happen. .88 for my x value. On all my other ones, it told me my y value is 0. On this one, it tells me my y value is negative 2.2 e negative 13. Do you remember what e negative 13 means? It's scientific notation. 2.2 e negative 13 is the same thing as 2.2 times 10 to the negative 13. So what is that if we wrote it out as a decimal? Right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 2, 2. Depending on what calculator you have, it may get you to 0, and some of them don't. But if we're concerned with accuracy to 3 decimal places, well, that's pretty darn close to 0, right? So some people get thrown off. They're like, oh, it didn't work because I didn't have 0 over here. You're like, well, think about what that number is. That's pretty close to 0. So don't be alarmed if e to the negative 13 shows up. Your calculator is not doing, I don't want to say it's not doing math. It's not doing algebra. It's just like guessing and checking until it gets a number close to 0. And when it gets close enough, it says, oh, that number worked. So all your calculator does is guess and check. It just does it really, really fast. Second calc 0. Yeah, I heard a math teacher say your calculator's not really smart. It's actually kind of dumb. It's just really fast at being dumb. By the way, the sign change on the y can sometimes help you if you're not sure if you've crossed the axis or not. So my left bound was up here and y was positive. So the right bound needs to be negative once I've crossed over. Oh, there's another e to the negative, but e to the negative 13, that's really small, so we're good. 4.712. So 6 answers, kind of annoying because there were 6 of them. The rest of the page usually has 2 or 4, so it's not nearly as bad. So this is calculator work today. It's all it is typing things into the calculator and making sure it works. Why don't you try number 4, and I'll put the answers to number 4 up here. And then when you're confident you're good, then you can just take off and maybe finish before you leave. So when you get a chance, compare your answers to number 4. Make sure you're okay. And the assignment is just the rest of that worksheet. So if you can type fast enough, you can finish this before you leave. I'll post answers in school, or at least odd answers in Schoology in a little bit.